Hello everyone, I hope you're all keeping well, healthy and happy. In this video I'm going to talk about the reasons why we're seeing the level of absolute chaos across Western civilization right now and what is causing that. Now in my very first video, the very first video I put up on this channel, I went through the modes and mechanisms and methods of subversion and psychological warfare and how this is carried out, okay? But in this video, I'm going to talk about the nuts and bolts of it all, in terms of how it is that a small clique of very elite people managed to gain total control over pretty much the entire advanced and developed world, okay? And in relation to this, actually, I was reading an article just the other day about Russia and how it was returning to its Stalinist communist roots. Earlier this week, the Russians celebrated one of their most feared and tyrannical leaders, a psychotic mass murderer by the name of Joe Stalin. Okay? They erected a statue to him. Actually, they're making many statues in honor of Stalin, whilst at the very same time, if you look at what's happening in the United States right now, historical relics and statues are being torn down. Okay? So this is a coordinated attack that is being waged on the United States of America, whilst Russia is returning back to its communist roots. Now, some of this renewed admiration is coming directly from President Vladimir Putin. Okay? Putin is very much in favor of the return of the Stalinist state. This is something a lot of people don't understand. Okay? What is going on right now is that propaganda outlets that are sympathetic to the Russian government are being given a lot of pravda, okay? They've been given a lot of fake news to spread about how great Russia is and how liberal it is and how much it's trying to reform and so on and so forth, and that Vladimir Putin is not actually that bad a guy, right? This is total nonsense, okay? I don't want people to be under the idiotic delusion that Russia abandoned communism. In fact, the proof is in the pudding. We know that they're erecting these statues again. We know that they're starting to speak very highly of Stalin again. Who would do that? Who in their right mind would do that when you consider that the Stalinist regime murdered 20 million people? And collectively, communism has murdered over 100 million people. My goodness me. It takes a certain level of total delusional belief to think that that's a good idea, that that's a good person that people should be erecting statues to. My God. Right? So don't be under that delusion is my point. Don't be under the delusion that Russia abandoned communism and suddenly became capitalist overnight. That did not happen. It never happened. What happened was that they went into a sort of a silent mode of operation. And what we're going to see is a brand new Soviet Union taking shape, and I'm going to give you the proof of this as well as we go through this video. But we're going to see the rise of this new type of Soviet Union, comprising of China, of course, Russia, and some of the Eastern Bloc countries as well. To understand how and why this is happening whilst this destabilization is occurring across the West, we need to go back through history. Let's go back in time to just after the Second World War in 1945. Because after World War II, the Allied powers established the United Nations Charter. And the countries that consented to this global bureaucracy were the United States, Great Britain, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. Now, in order to gain the favour of the USSR during the war, the other powers had agreed to cover up the crimes of Joe Stalin. This is what actually happened. Now, the UN Charter was signed by Truman, Churchill, and Stalin all together, basically. But here's an interesting fact about the Charter itself. It was drawn up by a gentleman called Alger Hiss from the US State Department, right? Now, I've spoken about this guy before. Hiss was outed as a communist. Okay, he was outed as a communist spy working for the USSR, and he admitted to this in 1948. So this had mass ramifications in terms of the direction that the UN originally took it from its inception, and even now to this day. Another communist spy who later admitted to his activities, working undercover for the Soviets that is, was Harry Dexter White. Again, I've mentioned this guy before. But this was back in the beginnings of the channel, so for those of you that have just subscribed or are recent subscribers, it's important to go through this information again, I think. Now, Harry Dexter White was an economist and a senior US Treasury Department official. And he was also the architect of both the IMF and the World Bank. Okay? And he used Keynesian economics and socialist policies to do great damage to the global economy. Because what he did was to ensnare foreign countries into an ever-expanding debt-based form of slavery. Okay? And of course, these two institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, reported directly back to the Bank of International Settlements, where other communist spies had set that mechanism up as well. Now, the US State Department, like most of the British institutions, had been very heavily influenced by Soviet spies, if that's not already apparent enough. You need only look at the governmental diktats of the time. For example, in 1961, the US State Department printed publication number 7277 with the stated goal of disarming the citizens of the United States of America, which of course contravenes their Second Amendment rights and voids the actual Constitution itself as well. Why did they do this? Well, this was part of a much grander plan, again involving the destabilization of not only the United States, but Great Britain and the European countries and so on as well, who were part of the West at that time. In that same year, that is 1961, on the 6th of December, the Soviets held the 81 Party Congress, where 81 communist parties from across the world ratified a strategic plan to allow a devious plan to be put into motion. What they would do was to feign the seeming downfall of communism within the USSR. And later, at a fortuitous time, they would resurrect the Union from the ashes in a new form that was larger than before. Now, this meeting and this plan were reported by two separate KGB defectors. One was Anatoly Golitsyn, and another was Nikolai Khokhlov. Khokhlov was a member of the 13th Department of the KGB's First Chief Directorate, who were responsible for what's dubbed in the business as wet work. That involves assassinations, sabotage, that sort of thing. Now, both of these gentlemen had also accurately predicted the fall of the Berlin Wall and exactly when it was going to happen as well, which gives extra credence to what they were saying. Now, Golitsyn was also instrumental in exposing the Cambridge Five. That was the Soviet spy ring inside MI6, consisting of Guy Burgess, Kim Philby, Donald McLean, John Vassell, and Alexander Kopatsky. Now, before we continue, it's worth mentioning that in line with Golitsyn and Khokhlov's predictions, we're already seeing the beginnings of a new Soviet-style union forming as an economic bloc called the Eurasian Economic Union. Okay, look that up if you're not already familiar with it. Again, it's called the Eurasian Economic Union. Now we're going to take a step back into history and look at the insides of the Communist Party and how the Russian mafia came to be, because believe it or not, the Russian mafia is actually in control of Moscow Central, right? It's in control of all the decisions that are made in Moscow by the ruling party, the ruling government there. Everything Vladimir Putin does is okayed and ratified by the Russian mafia, okay? You see, what happened was during the Brezhnev era, the OBK-HSS, which was the Department Against Misappropriation of Socialist Property, formed alliances with criminal elements in the USSR. And these elements, after being funded and financed by officials, became the modern-day branches of the Russian mafia, including the Vorevzakonye, the Bratsky Krug, and the, let me see if I can pronounce this correctly, Solntsevskaya Bratva. Over time, with help from the Economic Department and the MVD, the Ministry of the Interior, these criminal networks grew into global destabilization forces. And their activities included people smuggling, child trafficking, prostitution rings, and drug running. Okay? The MVD also formed alliances with the Solntsevskaya Bratva, which is today run by Semyon Mogilovich, who is a close friend of Vladimir Putin's. Meanwhile, in another outfit called the Bratsky Krug, which we spoke about, which is also known as the Family of 11, you saw this arms dealing. They became arms suppliers, and today they're run by a gentleman called Timuri Mirzoyev, and he was instrumental in supplying arms to the Kurdish PKK. We used him, in terms of the Western intelligence services, we used him to supply the Kurds with this conflict with Islamic State. So you might think, well, maybe these are good guys then, right? Because they seem to be helping us. Not at all. Not at all. Because you see, they had an agenda, an underlying agenda. The Kurds, although they were useful in fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda, are very much aligned with the communist cause. And they'd be all too happy to rejoin those efforts if and when the communist bloc rises again. So this is the thing of this. These communist powers have their tentacles spread worldwide, and they're motivated by an eschatological belief system. It's a nihilistic belief system. They very much would like to bring about the end of the world, whilst their most powerful leaders hide in the Russian continuity of government bunker in Kozvinsky Kamen. Okay? Now, I'll delve a little bit further into this. In the late 80s, another Soviet military intelligence GRU officer defected to the West. In 1978, he was stationed in Singapore, then in China in 1980, and then he was in the USA in 1988. He corroborated the other two accounts that we spoke about. And he also played a vital role in disrupting the RA-115 suitcase bomb plot. Let me tell you what happened with that. It's very interesting. You see, the GRU operatives who were working for Moscow had smuggled nuclear suitcase bombs into various Western countries, including the United States. Other large arms caches and safe houses were also set up for arming insurgent guerrilla forces, which is where some of the terrorists that carry out terrorist attacks today are still being supplied from, by the way. Chemical and biological weapons were also placed near the tributaries to major US reservoirs to poison the drinking water. Now, what had happened was that a few years prior, and the reason why they set this up was that a few years prior, under the direction of the US State Department, which again was heavily infiltrated, which wanted to also, those elements in there that were communist also wanted to bring about the end of the world, right? So, under their direction, the CIA launched Operation Able Archer and Operation Reforger and Operation Forge to convince the USSR that a full-scale nuclear attack was underway so that it would launch a retaliatory strike, thus triggering a nuclear holocaust. Okay? And it was only thanks to the sound moral judgment of Soviet Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, who refused to obey his orders, that this scenario was averted on the 26th of September 1983. In 1983, almost the entire world would have been involved in a nuclear war, had that gentleman obeyed his orders. This is part of the reason why I've talked about order followers and how dangerous they are. It's also the reason why a lot of other commentators have talked about order followers and why it's idiotic to just follow orders without thinking. Okay? You see, these powers set up the grand chessboard, and they have deceived you all with beautiful lies, okay? They've deceived you with beautiful lies. They want you to know that they hold your life in their hands, okay? It's a case of fear, propaganda, and mind control in order to control the masses. To understand that aspect better, I would recommend that everyone read Edward Bernay's book called Propaganda, or Gustave Le Bon's The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind. Okay? To further illustrate this point, in terms of the control mechanisms and what the hell happened, I'll show you the depth of the deception. Let's go back again to 1978, where another Soviet defector risked his life in a lethal game to liberate the minds of the enslaved. This defector was a former three-star general in the Securitate, which is the secret police of communist Romania. His name was Ion Mihai Pacepa. Okay? Now, I'll be listing all the names of these various people in their work as well. This gentleman was the highest ranking person to have defected ever practically, and he furnished the CIA and the FBI with information on how Soviet communist forces had funded and founded jihadist Islamic radicals, okay, and their armies to let them do the dirty work of destroying the West by proxy. And so what happened later was that the CIA and the State Department set up their own Islamist armies to counter the moves that were being made by Moscow, but they backfired very badly. And we ended up with the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and so on and so forth. We all know about the war in Afghanistan, right? Operation Cyclone and so on. The account I just gave, by the way, about the Soviet influence, the communist influence in arming jihadist militias, was also corroborated later on by Yuri Bezmenov, who was another KGB defector who defected in the, I think it was in the 70s. But getting back to Pacepa, to this day, he is being hunted by communist kill squads with orders for his execution directly from Moscow. Okay? They still have orders for his execution. And they're coming from the top. They're still coming from Moscow, the Kremlin. In the 1980s, Romania's political police enlisted Carlos the Jackal, the world-famous terrorist, to assassinate Pachipa in America for the price of $1 million. This top-secret mission was known as Operation 363. Carlos was given 37 pounds of plastic explosive EPP-88. He was also given 7 submachine guns, 1 Walther PP pistol, serial number 249460, with 1,306 bullets in it. With 1,306 bullets supplied as well. He was also given 8 Stechen pistols with 1,049 bullets and 5 UZRGM hand grenades. Carlos couldn't find Pachipa because he was under the protection of the FBI and the CIA at the time. But he instead bombed Radio Free Europe's headquarters in Munich on the 21st of February 1980. Now, according to Pachipa, the USSR and the present-day incarnation of Russia had been secretly supplying weapons of mass destruction to various regimes in the Middle East and elsewhere. They'd also developed a plan called Operation Sarandar to hide and remove weapons of mass destruction when the international community carried out inspections of these despotic regimes, which is part of the reason why you saw the weapons inspectors before the Iraq invasion, which was an extraordinarily bad idea. But you saw that they were getting conflicting and confusing reports. The reason behind this was that the Russians were moving the WMD around. They'd supplied them and then they hid them, which was very clever. And they did this in order to instigate a proxy war in the region, which they succeeded in doing, because that fed straight into their propaganda, their anti-American propaganda, which worked very well. Whilst these events were taking place, there was a full-on infiltration and subversion also happening with the Vatican. Okay? This is really interesting. If you're interested in knowing why the current Pope is a communist, okay? If you're interested in understanding that, this will explain it to you. So, what they used, that is the KGB, was something called liberation theology, which was developed by the KGB as a means of destroying the mores of morality. And in fact, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church today, Patriarch Kirill, who has met many times with the current Pope, secretly worked for the KGB under the code name Mikhailov, and he spent 4 decades promoting liberation theology, which the intelligence community nicknamed Christianized Marxism. Its genesis was part of a highly classified state disinformation program, approved in 1960 by the then KGB chairman, Alexander Shelepin, and also the Politburo member, Alexei Kirichenko. Now, we all know the history of the Vatican and the Catholic Church, that it has changed many times over the years. The rulership over the church has changed many times. Whether it was the Flavians or the Borgias or the Martinists or the Reformists under Martin Luther and so on, many changes have happened. But this latest incarnation of Christianized Marxism is profoundly dangerous, because what it does is it risks the very existence of civilization, because it's handed over the temporal seat of power to communists, which is fundamentally what happened. Now, I could tell you much more about the current Pope as well and his involvement in the communist and socialist systems from his country of origin. Okay, but I'm not going to do that. That would detract from what I'm trying to get to here. You can look that up yourself if you are curious about that. But back in our current times, the picture is now starting to take shape, isn't it? Right? We must now consider the destabilization of the United States of America and the rest of the West. And to do this, we have to look at another man called Alexander Dugin. Okay? Dugin's father, Gilay Alexandrovich Dugin, was a Soviet military intelligence colonel general in the GRU. Okay, that's their intelligence branch. And Dugin's tentacles currently reach straight into the State Duma because Dugin believes very, very strongly in hastening the end of times. That's in his own words. And he's going to do this, he believes, through a global war. Okay? This again echoes the eschatological nihilistic core of communist belief, by the way. Right? His so-called fourth wave, right, is basically the direction in which they want to take things in order to instigate a third world war. But Dugin served as an advisor to State Duma Speaker Gennady Zeleznoyev, and also to, let me repeat that, sorry. Russian names are not the easiest to pronounce, it has to be said. So, Gennady Zeleznoyev. And he also served as an advisor to Sergei Narishkin, who is a key member of the ruling United Russia Party. So he has considerable influence. He's also a very good friend of Vladimir Putin's, by the way. That's something that a lot of people won't tell you either. So, very, very powerful connections. And he's got connections into the Russian mafia as well, the people that we spoke about earlier. In 1988, he joined the nationalist group Pamyat, which is known for its core National Socialist principles. And he helped to write the political program for the newly founded, or the refounded as it was then, Communist Party of the Russian Federation. He's a great champion of this reinvented brand of National Bolshevism. Okay? His assertions show that he likes Stalin and the Soviet Union. He said, and I quote, "We are on the side of Stalin and the Soviet Union." So it doesn't get much clearer than that, right? This is part of the reason why we're seeing this resurgence, this worship of Stalin again. Now, Dugin calls himself a conservative and says, "We conservatives want a strong, solid state. We want order and healthy family and positive values and the reinforcing of the importance of religion and the church in society." But what he's talking about is the Russian Orthodox Church, which is headed by Patriarch Kirill, who was previously an agent of the KGB and is still an agent of various forces in the Kremlin. Okay? Dugin dreams of a Russian strategic alliance as well with the European and particularly the Middle Eastern states, primarily Iran, and including Saudi Arabia, right? In his book, The Basics of Geopolitics, which was published in 1997, he says the following: "In principle, Eurasia and our space, the heartland Russia, remain the staging area of a new anti-bourgeois, anti-American revolution. The new Eurasian empire will be constructed on the fundamental principle of the common enemy." They consider America to be the common enemy. They consider the West to be a common enemy, right? Which is why they're linking up again. Dugin was responsible for the creation, the funding, and the financing of the so-called Alt-Reich. Okay? The Alt-Reich was founded on the principles of national communism, national socialism, and national Bolshevism, which is why you see many of the elements within that small agitprop group behaving in the same ways as communists, behaving and acting through their life in the same way as socialists, having socialist leanings. And the media wrongly characterizes these people as being far right. They're not. Okay? That's very, very important to note. I've already said that before. Meanwhile, you've also got George Soros, who's working in tandem with Moscow Central. Okay, now you ask anyone who knows their onions, they will tell you this. And what has happened is that he also has funded millions to other agitprop groups, okay, including Antifa communists. And his groups, of course, are banned from operating in Russia. But that's with his express permission, by the way. That's something people won't tell you either. And it's so that things look good for public appearances because Moscow, Russia, is all about the propaganda. It's all about looking good on the international stage while they absolutely gut and destroy all things civilized. Okay? But if you really want to know who the key change agents are who are agitating for social disorder and civil breakdown, you need look no further than Dugin and Soros. These are the two people who are doing it. There's a propaganda war being waged out of Moscow and Beijing as well. As I mentioned before, China are the central figures in a lot of this as well because they're the people through whom, they're the country rather, through whom Moscow implements its agenda. Okay? And they're looking to destabilize the West and also the Middle East as well. Right? And the reason they're doing this is because they want to bring about World War III. Why, you might wonder, would they be so nihilistic? Why, you might wonder, might they cling to an apocalyptic desire? The answer is very simple, because after that happens, the public will beg for world governance, a total totalitarian global government, a new world order. Okay, this is being done to further the aims of a new world order, which has its roots directly within dark occult secret societies that began over 150 years ago. And this is the game now on the world stage that is still being played out. Okay, it's very important to understand all of this. But I've given you this information now, and as I say, I will also post the names of the various people I've spoken about, especially the KGB defectors who came over to the West, and you can research this information yourself and verify it as being factual and truthful by yourselves. Okay? Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Take good care of yourselves, and God bless you all.